Please listen carefully.
All right, guys. So today on the podcast, we have Greg Everett. Greg, I had first probably heard about years ago when he was working with Rob Wolf on the Paleo Sushi podcast, and we'll get into some of the history. But he just came out with a book called Tough. Building true mental, physical, and emotional toughness for success and fulfillment. So we'll dive into that as well. Um, Greg, thanks for being here. I know you're a busy guy. Um, can you give our audience a little bit of background as to who you are, maybe leading up to your role as a weightlifting coach and obviously as an author as well?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me too. I appreciate it. Um, so I own and run Catalyst Athletics, which is kind of the two arms of it are first and foremost, it is a competitive weightlifting team. So we have a national championship women's team. We've been around for quite a few years now at this point. But then also the business side of it is that we publish primarily instructional material, educational material for weightlifting, both for coaches and athletes. And so I've been doing that since 2006 when I started it. Sort of since 2005, if you consider the performance menu, which is now a part of Catalyst Athletics. So been on that train for a little while. Um, Prior to that, man, background, I don't even know where to start. It goes back to real early years of just being involved in pretty much every sport you can think of, and probably a handful you haven't even heard of, and always being really drawn to the training aspect of whatever I was doing. And so it was kind of a natural progression, I think, for me when the opportunities arose to get into training, which I did at age 18, personal training, that sort of thing. And then I eventually met Rob Wolf, I think in early 2003, and he had helped start the first CrossFit affiliate gym. Like, he and his partners literally gave the idea of having affiliate gyms to Greg and
Hmm.
Lauren Glassman. Shortly thereafter, he moved
Hmm.
down to Northern California from Seattle and started the fourth affiliate, which I then became partners or a partner in shortly thereafter. So been kind of in that CrossFit and weightlifting world for a long time in various ways, and just have been very fortunate in who I've met and when, and gotten a lot of good opportunities.
Now, you would consider yourself more on the weightlifting side, obviously, than the CrossFit side. How did you get into weightlifting? Because I imagine at the time it was not what it is today in terms of, uh, you know, you've seen the growing popularity. I think you would agree, in large part due to CrossFit. But I'm imagining at the time that you got into it, it really wasn't like a
Yeah,
popular thing.
yeah. Back in the olden days, so that would have been, early to mid '90s is when I first started kind of playing with snatch, clean, and jerk. Um, yeah, you couldn't just get on the Google machine and look up weightlifting coach near me.
Right.
Uh, I didn't know anyone who had ever done it. I certainly didn't know any coaches. My high school weight room was like two, power racks and a couple of benches. No platforms, no bumpers, none of that stuff.
Hmm.
The strength coaches at my high school were kind of bodybuilding guys. So, I think the first, or at least one of the first exposures I had to it was Charles Poliquin's old book, Poliquin Principles. And there was a
Hmm.
picture of a guy from the Air Force weightlifting team doing a front squat in a singlet. And I was like, huh,
Hmm.
what's this?
Hmm.
And so it was really just kind of putting the pieces together on my own in my garage. And I can't say that I was particularly adept at it at that point. And of course, many years later, I discovered that Jim Schmitz, who's one of the most decorated weightlifting coaches in the country, was 45 minutes north of where I grew up.
Hmm.
But
There was no social
there was
media
no
then.
way
There
for me
was
to
no,
know that.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to randomly one day pick up a phone book from South San Francisco and be like, "Oh, look, weightlifting coach." Um, so that was frustrating in retrospect. But so I kind of just you know screwed around a little bit with it for a number of years, and like you said, CrossFit was a big help for the sport in general. It certainly helped me in that sense because when I finally met Rob Wolf, that was an opportunity where it's like, hey, we got rubber on the floor, we got bar. It wasn't a great bar, but at least it spun a little bit, and we've got some bumper plates. So it was kind of this chance for me to take this thing that I had been interested in for years, but kind of been unable to pursue because of the circumstances, and then really have that chance to run with it. So the CrossFit for me was less about CrossFit than it was for opportunities for weightlifting, and that has really played out on a really big scale in the past 10 years.
Got it. So, from my understanding, you also have experience with things like working on an ambulance, working in a bike shop. We'll talk about the tactical games later, but
Multiple bike shops.
okay. See, that's important to know.
Quite a professional.
Important to have that on your resume as a
Yeah.
weightlifting coach for sure. So, talk about those in the sense of like, what got you interested in these things? It seems like you have a ton of different interests, and so where does that come from?
You know what? I don't know where it comes from. I feel like I've always been naturally curious to a large extent, and um, I think that's the nice way of looking at it. The not as nice way of looking at it is that I get bored with things very quickly, right? So it's not
Hmm.
always a positive thing like, oh, I'm so excited, I want to go learn new stuff. It's like I'm
Hmm.
kind of tired of the stuff I already know. I want to go do something else. So
Hmm.
you can kind of look at it both ways, but I think ultimately either way you look at it, it's been a really beneficial thing for me because I have gotten a ridiculously broad array of experiences, and having the ability to uh, be good friends with people from totally different backgrounds, and working in with people or for people with totally different backgrounds. So I think it's provided me kind of an abnormal amount of insight for
Hmm.
my age, if that makes sense. And of course, now it's harder for me to say that because now I'm getting old. But so I've just been, again, like I said earlier, I've been really fortunate with having these opportunities, but also, of course, there was a lot of active seeking out of those opportunities and pursuing things that weren't necessarily easy for me to do. Yeah, the ambulance thing is it was that was kind of a roundabout thing too, because I moved to Northern California specifically to go through the Butte County Fire Academy.
Hmm.
I got the job working on the ambulance and got sidetracked doing that and ended up not going to the academy.
Hmm.
So, and then of course I did that for a while and was like, well, this is cool, but it's not really what I want to do. And that was right around the time I met Rob. So I started running the gym
Hmm.
while I was also supporting myself with, website design and subsidy publishing other people's books. And, Rob, his wife, Nikki, and I all had like two or three jobs to
Hmm.
try to make that gym go. And so
Hmm.
that's for those people who just started their CrossFit gym a couple years ago, whole different landscape back then. We were begging people to train with us because no one knew what CrossFit was and they all thought it looked stupid. Whereas
Yep.
now you have an existing market. So it was a
Yep.
very different game back then.
Yeah, I
I
think you
forget the
guys.
original question honestly, but I don't
It's
think I
it's
answered
totally
it.
fine. I do too. I think you guys were. I don't know where I heard this, but like slapping your own stickers on water bottles and like handing them
Oh
out
yeah.
at like 5Ks or stuff.
I actually remember that very specifically. There was some race nearby Bidwell Park in Chico, and it was Rob and Nikki's genius idea to go there and kind of as a sponsorship sort of thing, be at the finish line handing out waters.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so they told me like, hey, you need to design a little thing that we can glue to the water bottles. That's basically an ad. And so I designed this thing. We printed out a million of them. I sat there with like spray adhesive in the parking lot of the gym, like wrapping them around God knows how many bottles. I don't think we got a single client out of that. Nikki and I once walked the length of this asphalt bike path in Chico, and I don't know how many miles it was, but it was a long day. And
Hmm.
every however many yards, one of us would kneel down and with chalk write the name of the gym and the website. Just
Yep. Mm.
ridiculous marketing stuff that I don't think ever got us a single person, but it was like there was nothing else to do, right? Because you,
Yeah.
you
The
had to just
origins
get it
of
in
guerrilla
front of
marketing.
people. Yeah,
Yep. Especially without the brand name recognition that it has now, for sure.
right.
Cool, man. Um, so when you talk about like a lot of these things that you get into, well, actually, let's back up. So I think you were an English major, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
was that an intentional decision, or was that like a I don't really know what I want to do, but so I'm just gonna major in English.
It was mostly the latter. That was my third college, and because I had just bouncing around, not having any idea what I wanted to do, and I just figured, hey, I need to get a degree and just get out of here. So English has got to
Hmm.
be the easiest thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so during a time toward the end of that, I was considering going the graduate school route and teaching American Lit in college. I actually taught a course at Chico State,
Hmm.
and I hated every second of it. Couldn't stand it. I couldn't get out of that room fast enough every day. Um, so that took me off that path really quickly because I realized that it wasn't. While I think by nature I like teaching, I like helping
Hmm.
people, not in that format. It just
Hmm.
didn't suit me at all. So
Too
luckily I
dry,
figured that
too
out.
like structured.
Yeah, I think there were too much structure and too much. I just didn't like being having the restrictions of having to teach certain things in certain ways
Hmm.
versus now that's essentially what I do all day long is teach, but I do
Right.
literally whatever I want, however I want, when I want.
Yep.
Um, I've been since I've been self-employed basically since I was, 23 or so. So the
Hmm.
idea of having a boss and having a rigid structure, I don't think I could handle it. I think I would just have a nervous breakdown.
Where do you think that comes from? You feel like you were like that even as a little kid?
Um, Probably. I think I was always very motivated to work. Like I had jobs, going back to being 10 years old between paper routes and
Hmm.
like painting red curbs. I remember being 11 years old, rolling on my skateboard with the paint so I didn't have to bend over the whole time. So I was always looking for ways to make money, to have that sense of independence. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, it clearly is part of my nature that I just didn't want to be under someone else's thumb.
Yeah. I've followed a lot of your stuff over the years, and you're definitely one of the most self-deprecating people out there. So you provide a ton of value by answering people's questions on Instagram and by posting the performance menu and um, posting useful videos that are digestible and so you put out just a ton of content, but at the same time, you also um, put off a very humble front, which I feel like in someone in your position, especially in these days where weightlifting is pretty popular um, relative to a decade ago, you could be, that like quote unquote Instagram celebrity, right? Whereas you put out content, people follow you if they like you, and you don't really seem to care if they don't, right? um, where do you feel like you've gotten that balance of you know this is an overused word, but authenticity, right? But because you seem like right now you are exactly the person who I met at the seminar down in Charleston, however 7 years ago or whatever, and also the person that people see on Instagram. So where does that come from?
I think it's just I don't like Instagram celebrities. I don't like the inauthentic persona that has become so prevalent because it's so easy with the advent of social media. It's so easy to pretend to be someone you are not
Hmm.
and to have this weird air of entitlement and this expectation that people be in love with you and think you're the greatest thing on earth. And it's just a bunch of little peasants running around at your knee and you're patting them on the head every once in a while if you feel like it. That's ridiculous, man. Like I coach weightlifting. It's not like I'm not some uh, you know epic civil rights leader or like an astronaut who went to the moon before anyone else. Like I teach people how to snatch and clean and jerk, and maybe I throw out some tidbits of life advice here and there if I feel like it, if it doesn't feel too pretentious to me at the moment. Um, so I think that's all it is. It's just a recognition that it's not that big of a deal. I don't take myself that seriously, and at the end of the day, I realize I got to be able to go home and live with myself. You know what I mean? And I
Hmm.
would be absolutely embarrassed uh, to behave the way that I see 90% of uh, people kind of in my position behaving because I don't think it's necessary, first of all. And I have this dilemma all the time. It's like, I could make more money. I could have more followers on Instagram and YouTube if I just chose to act more like a douchebag.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it's that's the formula, and
Yep.
it's really sad. Like one weird trick. Like I
Yep.
don't want to be that guy. Here's
Yep.
my video. It's about the snatch turnover. If you don't
Hmm.
like the title, then you can go see someone else's goofy video that doesn't teach you anything and spends 20 minutes, telling you how cool that guy is, right? So
Yep.
um, it's really just a personal thing. I'm not willing to create a persona that I'm not even comfortable with, right? I don't want to be embarrassed by myself. I do that naturally enough as it is.
When you and Amy are working with athletes, are there times where people reach out to you and they're like, "Hey, I would love to work with you. Can you coach me?" Whatever. But you turn them away because kind of related to what we were just talking about. Their persona is just it's not a good fit.
Oh yeah. Well, between the two of us, we turn down a lot of people, and primarily it's just an issue of time.
Sure.
Um, Amy coaches a lot of one-on-one clients and a lot of athletes. I have my competitive team lifters, and then I only have a couple private clients now.
Mm,
And then I have a couple teams on Train Heroic, which to me that was a better way to be more accessible to people because
mhm.
there aren't a lot of people who can afford to pay me $300 a month for personal training.
Right.
And I don't like charging that much, but that's what's kind of necessary these
Yep.
days.
Yep.
Um, so instead, I can get hundreds of people for 25 to 30 bucks a month and still give them some degree of that.
Yep.
But yes, there have been um, many times where just having conversations with a potential athlete, or it's not entirely out of the question that we might go kind of check out their Instagram sometimes and see, like, do we want to be associated with this person, or
Hmm.
is this someone that's going to just drive me nuts every day until I have to fire them? Because it's much easier to just not take an athlete in the first place and say, I'm too busy or whatever,
Yep.
than have to, after 6 months or something, have to be like, I can't stand you. Like, you got to find a
Hmm.
different coach.
Hmm.
Like, that's a hard conversation to have.
Hmm.
Because even if you don't like them, you don't like hurting people's feelings and like being a dick about it. But
Yep.
at this point, luckily, we're both established enough that we can be pretty picky with who we work with.
Hmm.
Um, so, 10 years ago, that wasn't the case, where we pretty much had to take anybody who was willing us to give us any amount of money. And I'm
Hmm.
very glad that I'm not in that position anymore, because I had
Hmm.
some miserable experiences with various people, as I'm
Got it.
sure all coaches and trainers have.
For sure. But that's, I mean, that's, in business and in many things, like you got to say yes to everything at first. And then if what you're providing is actually valuable and you are in more demand, then you can afford to say no. Right.
Yeah, when you
Um,
have to.
right. Right.
That's one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the past few years is I have to say no more, and I don't like doing it.
Hmm. So let's talk about the book. You've written several books, right? Or over a dozen. I feel like your Olympic weightlifting book is like the Bible of weightlifting, in the sense of if anyone has seen it or read it, they would think you could only talk so much about the hook grip, but let Greg Everett actually school
But
you
I'll
on.
talk more.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so, where did this book tough come from? It seems like it's been a long time in the making, but it finally is kind of crystallized in the last year or so. So, you want to talk about how it all came about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the origins were, but I do have notes on my computer dating back to 2011 with a book
Mm,
of that title. Uh,
mm,
to be fair, the original concept was not what it turned out to be. It was definitely more skewed towards the physical side of things.
mm,
Obviously, some of the mental side, but it was not the really broad, all-encompassing thing that it turned out to be. And so I think it's just been a lifetime of, like we talked about earlier, a lot of different experiences and a lot of um, my personal experiences with trying to kind of figure my way through life, and being that uh, growing up very insecure, very self-conscious, and that eventually turning into just being the stereotypical super pissed off teenager and 20 something guy who just instead of wanting to actually deal with things productively was just like, I hate everybody, everything's a problem, and I'm just going to be mad about it.
Hmm.
um, and so really kind of that personal evolution, along with all of the experiences I had with other people and learning uh, these common patterns and all that stuff, and trying to assemble it in a way that was accessible to anybody who wanted to figure this stuff out, but also provided actual practical guidance. So it's not just like this
Right.
real nebulous philosophical sort of book. Like, this is what I think about the world. Now, good luck figuring out how to implement this in any practical
Right.
way.
Hmm.
So I really tried to make it all inclusive and totally accessible, but also useful, right? So you're not
Yep.
just like reading it and then sitting in bed for 2 hours every night wondering, all right, I know something's wrong, but I don't know, what am I going to do about it? So
Right. Right.
this is a paint by the numbers sort of thing, ultimately.
Yeah. So I thought we could go through the four C's. So you
Hmm.
have character, capability, capacity, and commitment, which is pretty convenient. Also a C.
All,
Um,
yeah, this is where it goes right here.
yeah, exactly.
All C's.
So, so talk about character. What is that all about in the book?
So character is your identity, but also your security in that identity. So by identity, I mean, who you are, what you value, what is meaningful for you or to you. What are your underlying motivations? Why do you do the things you do? Why do you value the things you do? And understanding that that is ultimately self-determined if you choose it to be, right? So
Hmm.
we can either say, this is who I am, there's nothing I can do about it, maybe I'm just going to be miserable for the rest of my life and unsuccessful and unfulfilled. Or you can kind of accept that responsibility and say, no, this is who I want to be,
Hmm.
therefore I'm going to determine what the behavior and ways of thinking um, that support that identity are, and then I'm going to work to implement those things into my life until I'm no longer acting like that person, but have actually become that person. And the security side of things is really critical, because that's how we avoid, all the silly competition and one-upmanship and the desperate attention seeking and searches for validation. So speaking of Instagram,
Yep.
um, and you end up just being able to simply be who you are, do what is meaningful to you, and interact with people with honesty and integrity, versus always having some kind of weird ulterior motive, even if it's not. I don't mean that it is some kind of like nefarious plot, but just in the
Hmm.
sense that you're not really doing something for its own sake, but you're doing it because you're trying to get attention or credit for it, or whatever the case is.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's really what that comes down to, and that's the foundation of everything else.
Yeah. I think this quote comes from that section. It says, "Most of us float through life like a fallen stick on a river rather than making clear choices about what we are and what we're doing. We spend our lives retroactively describing who we happen to be rather than proactively prescribing who we are." So, yeah, I really like that. Um,
Yeah, I don't like the idea that I'm very much not a fatalist, right? I don't
mhm.
believe that we have this like set, our lives are set and predetermined, because what's the point?
Yep.
You literally could just sit on your couch and watch TV for the rest of your life and it would make no difference.
Yeah. So I don't know if you listened to How I Built This, NPR's How I Built This, but Guy Raz on that always asks business leaders if they believe their success is related to luck or their hard work. So I'm
Mhm.
guessing that you would lean way more towards the hard work.
The hard work, but yes, I do recognize that often there are circumstances that have nothing to do with my own work that
Hmm.
have provided me opportunities. But
Sure. Sure.
again, that's where that hard work comes in, because that's what prepares you to take advantage of those opportunities when they arise.
Yeah, and I think, between your own journey and basically everyone else's, I think a lot of people think about their future in a very linear fashion. Like, I'm going to
Hmm.
have a 10-year goal of this, and I will just head
Right.
straight towards that, right? Whereas personally, I don't really believe in doing 10-year goals because to me, that's just way too far out. And anything can
Yeah.
happen between now and then, let alone like even now and a year from now, right? Like, no one knew the pandemic was coming, right? And you have
Right.
people losing their jobs, but all of a sudden now they realize that their passion is now something they can pursue and they're turning it into a career. Right.
Right.
So not that they would have ever predicted that. What's an
Yeah.
actionable
Well,
step related to character? Yeah, go ahead. But yeah,
I was
go
just
ahead.
going to say that that's a perfect example of adversity being an opportunity if you make the choice to use it, right? Because those same
Right.
people who are
Right.
saying, well, I never would have realized this is what I wanted to do, and I never would have taken the risk, but now I have this
Hmm.
opportunity because I lost my job and I've got to do something, so I might as well do this thing that I want to do.
Right.
That's that's the real self determination that we need versus I lost my job, woe is me,
Woe
the
is
world
me.
hates me, there's nothing I
Hmm.
can do about it, right?
Hmm.
And so
Yep.
I'm not saying that having that attitude means that magically you're going to start this new career and become a billionaire. You're
Hmm.
still very likely going to struggle and have a lot of problems, but
Yep.
changing the way you view that experience is going to make all the difference in the world, both in how you experience it and what the ultimate outcome is.
I love it. What's something tangible that someone can do to examine their own character? Something they can either think about, put down on paper, something to
It,
kind of question themselves.
you definitely got to put it down on paper, and the book has a series of exercises at the end of each chapter for the specific content.
Yep.
Um, but you definitely need as the absolute baseline is you need to sit down and describe who you are, right? Not how you think you are, not how you want to be, not who other people see you as, but who you truly are. And it doesn't have to be super expensive. You don't have to do a whole Freudian psychoanalysis or anything at that point. Um, and once you've done that, then you need to describe who you want to be, right? If everything you could possibly want were attainable in terms of your character and your values, what would that look like?
Hmm.
So, and then once you've got that, you've got to figure out the difference, right? What's the gap there, and how, what do you need to do in order to close that gap and to move from who you are to who you want to be? And most of that's going to be require some really tough and often very unflattering and kind of discouraging self-examination. Most of us are not willing to truly take a look at who we are. We're very good at self-deception,
Hmm.
um, and unfortunately, the problem with that is that it prevents our ever changing and improving and getting to the point we want to be. Because if we don't believe we have this shortcoming or problem, why would we ever take steps to change it or try to repair it, right? So you kind of have to
Yeah.
get the real nasty, uncomfortable stuff out of the way because that's what gives you the opportunity to then make the moves that bring you to where you want to be.
Cool. Yeah. Basically, establish a baseline, figure out where you want to go, and then figure out what those gaps are to at least start working on those.
Yep.
So the second one is capability. What's that all about?
It's about everything that could possibly fall under the umbrella of the word capability. And I don't even mean that as a joke. It really truly is. So, a lot of times when we think of toughness, we think of, two basic things. One is, physical ability, like, well, I can climb a mountain or I can, beat this guy up. And then we have the idea of resilience. And to me, capability is really so much broader than that. It is the widest array of not just physical abilities and physical skills, but mental and emotional tools and knowledge. So this is essentially our toolbox that we're going to pile as many different tools and experiences into as possible. Because the more of those we have, the more prepared we are to successfully deal with any possible thing we encounter, right? So even totally unrelated abilities or what we see as being unrelated abilities, we'll often be able to combine synergistically in certain situations. When opportunities or demands arise, where we never would have imagined that these two things would go together,
Hmm.
and suddenly we find ourselves in some kind of emergency or some sort of challenge, and all of a sudden that's what allows us to figure something out, to overcome some obstacle, to be successful. So
Hmm.
again, the more of those tools that we can learn and develop, the more information we have, the more experience we have using those things, in different situations, the more ready we are to apply them to, novel experiences that we can't predict.
Yep. I never would have imagined that I would own a gym or even be a trainer of any sort. Because growing up, I always thought they were, meatheads who, couldn't really do anything else. I
Yeah.
started college as an engineer, ended up switching in junior year to counseling, worked in the school system for a little bit, and then quit that and opened up a gym. So I'll talk about moment arms and levers and things that I learned as an engineer
Right.
when coaching, because that it has all to do with physics, right? But there's no way that I would have prepared myself or even thought that was something that I should be doing in order to get to the point that I wanted to be, right?
Right.
So yeah, this is stuff that
Engineering is not a typical track for a coach,
no, no.
but neither
Um,
is English. So
I was gonna say, yeah, neither is English, but it
it's not
allows
really
you
a
to
track for anything.
right. It does allow you to write 5 pages about the hook grip, though. Um,
True.
so, what's something that tangible that someone could do to increase or to better their capability?
Uh, this one you can break into a couple different steps. First and foremost is to look at what your true needed abilities are based on your profession, your lifestyle, and your locality. Right. So you have to check those things off the list first, because without those, you're either not doing your job well or losing your job, or getting hurt or killed. Right. If you're in law enforcement or the military,
Hmm.
or you're a fisherman in the North Atlantic, if you're not good at your job, you are risking life and limb. Um, and then beyond that, you've got to figure out, okay, what are the next things that might continue to support what I do already, but that I'm also interested in? How can I start expanding out from what I do every day? And then you move on to the most peripheral stuff, like I want to learn how to weld, or I want to be
Hmm.
fluent in German, what, anything. And the real goal ultimately is to not just shore up the abilities that you need day to day, but to move well beyond your, what is typically for us a very narrow bandwidth of experience and ability. Um, and you have to get out there and be willing to risk a little embarrassment and a little bit of temporary failure
Hmm.
in order to learn this stuff, versus what we typically do, which is I have my little area. This is my space. I'm staying in my lane, as we like to say.
Yep.
Uh, but the problem with that is, but aside from the fact that you're missing out on all these amazing experiences in which you can learn, um, it is very easy to overestimate your ability outside that realm based on your good ability within it, right?
Hmm.
So it's like,
Hmm.
okay, if you're an engineer, all the physics and stuff like that, but then my dad was an engineer too, so don't take it personally, but engineers have a reputation of believing they're great architects or they're great mechanics,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yep.
And that's rarely the case. We all have our specialty, and that's always going to remain true. We're always going to be best at something, largely because it's what we've been doing longest.
Hmm.
But the more we can get out there and experience things that are totally unrelated, to that original focus, um, not only are we more capable in general, but we start, and as you learned, we start getting insight into that original specialty that we never would have been able to have had we stayed within that realm,
Hmm.
right? And that's the thing, is you can't predict what you're going to learn from elsewhere that applies to what you're already doing, but I can promise that you will learn something if you're paying attention.
You feel like that's coming from a fear of failure, the fact that a lot of people
Oh yeah.
stay in their lane.
And I don't know if it's even failure directly so much as embarrassment. They don't want to
Mm.
feel
Yep.
vulnerable. They don't want to be
Yep.
exposed in front of their peers as being incapable,
Right.
because men especially, right, is we tend to have that part of our ego which is all about um, looking or appearing capable to others, right? Well, I'm
Yep.
not worried about getting in a fight, or I'm not worried about the house catching on fire because I'll save everybody.
Hmm.
um, but what happens is that rather than actually doing the things necessary to have those capabilities, and therefore the confidence that we're pretending to have, we just avoid anything that would expose our incapability with those things, so
Right.
we can keep pretending that we have it.
Yeah. It's a
So yeah, the
machismo.
actionable step
Yeah.
is to get out there and risk that embarrassment which is minor, temporary. No one cares about it. They're all going to forget about it and move on
Yep.
before you do,
Yep.
and to actually be willing to get out there and try stuff.
Yeah, it's a old school way of thinking about being tough, right? If you're
Right,
just, you know, puffing up your chest and having this machismo about, being able to beat up someone else. But what you're saying is, hey, look, like you got to have different experiences in order to make yourself more resilient.
right.
And I think you tell a story of the guy who was out at sea for like 76 days, Stephen Callahan.
Stephen Callahan, yeah.
Yeah. So uh, talk about that because people might have heard the story, but when it was in the news. But what was his deal and why is he considered tough?
So this guy was sailing solo across the Atlantic Ocean. So solo, it's a relatively small boat, was hit by a whale at some point and sank really quickly, like so quickly he couldn't even get all of his emergency supplies out. Um, Fortunately, he got the life raft, which had some supplies on it, and it's got a solar still and a backup solar still. Neither of them worked. Like he was constantly having to fiddle with things and make them work. And he was out there for 76 days. And those rafts and those supplies are not built to last that long. They just
Hmm.
don't. They start disintegrating and all kinds of problems. So the most amazing thing he did was he had a leak in the raft, and no matter what he tried, it would his patches wouldn't hold. He's trying to tie rope around it, all these things,
Hmm.
and so finally he figures out a way to uh, fix the leak using a fork, which with some rope and stuff. But
Hmm. Hmm.
the level of ingenuity and willingness to like have these really audacious ideas
Hmm.
to be able to come up with fixing a leak in a raft with something that we normally associate with creating leaks,
Right.
it just a whole nother level.
Yep.
And so the fact that this guy could not just survive physically, um, but think about being alone, totally isolated for 76 days. Even if you're in a safe place and you have all the life supporting supplies you need, most of us would lose our minds. Like literally, we would go crazy.
Yeah, just being alone.
So yeah, so not only did he do that, he did that in the presence of a constant threat of death. There's sharks bumping into his raft here and there. He can barely get enough water to drink. He's having to try to catch fish that happen to swim close enough to the raft. Dry the meat, and then it pours rain and it gets wet and it rots and he can't eat it. Just anything you can imagine, he's dealing with that, maintaining the presence of mind to do stuff like you know fix a leak in a raft with a fork, and then gets back home. And not only does he survive, but he ends up, having this great productive life after that. This was in the mid '80s, I think, that it happened. And I actually talked to him real briefly via email a couple months ago, and he's
Mm.
just the nicest guy. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm so happy to see that my story is like still helping and inspiring people." And so it's like every every facet of being a true survivor and thriving through just ridiculous adversity he demonstrated. So
Hmm.
he's a pretty impressive example of this stuff.
Yeah, I think he made a sextant out of like pencils, right? Like
Yep, yep,
I wouldn't even know where to begin with that, right? So
yeah.
um,
I think it just looks like chopsticks.
yeah. So the third C is capacity. What is capacity all about?
So capacity is what we typically think of as resilience, right? But my problem with resilience is that, and this is probably more you would look at it this way from an engineering perspective, right? Is resilience is really the ability to return to the original condition after some kind of traumatic event, right? And so that's okay.
Hmm.
It's a good start, but that's not good enough to me. Like if you're going to go through some kind of adversity, your goal should be to come out better on
Mm.
the other end, not just, you know, it's like huddling in the cellar riding out a storm,
Hmm.
and then once the storm passes you just resume your normal life. Like, okay, that's okay, but
Right.
how about after that storm you go outside, you assess what's happening. Oh, this tree's down, this is broken. Well, now this is my opportunity to fix all these problems I had before.
Hmm.
I have to repair this stuff anyway, so now I'm going to improve.
Yep.
So that's the way I look at capacity ultimately is not just the ability to survive and kind of withstand adversity, hardship, challenge, but to actually exploit it to our advantage. And the key thing is when you talk about this stuff, you have to remind people this attitude doesn't make unpleasant experiences magically pleasant, right?
Mhm.
You're still going to be miserable in an objective sense,
Mhm.
but are less miserable emotionally because the way you are viewing this experience is not as a victim, but as someone who has that agency, who is taking the responsibility, and recognizes the difference between blame and responsibility. Right? It's not
Mhm.
my fault that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but it's my responsibility to do everything I can to make this situation work as well as possible for me.
Yep.
Right? And so that attitude uh, completely changes our experience in life. And again, that's how we turn this stuff into opportunity and we find ways to actually become better, stronger, smarter, more engaged, whatever, through it and afterwards. And so that's really what capacity is. It's resilience plus a way more active, um,
Mhm.
eager intent to grow from it. I hate saying that grow from it. It sounds so new agey and self help, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I think of you as new agey and self-helpy. So, self-helpy is an oxymoron, though, right? Because people are reading a book to help themselves, so they're asking for your help in helping them.
Right.
So, yeah, um,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it goes back to what we were just talking about, in the sense of like, don't just sit back, like, be an active participant
Right.
and be proactive in whatever you're going to do afterwards. The people who are feeling sorry for themselves all the time, complaining about the same thing happening over and over and over again, well, chances are,
Yeah.
like, you're the sucker in the poker at the poker table,
Right.
Um,
What a shock! Nothing in your life has changed for you.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, all right, so I don't know if we talked about it, but is there something tangible related to capacity that people can do? Uh,
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff because this is a big umbrella. This is the longest chapter in the book.
mhm,
Um, the most immediate thing you can do is to focus on self awareness, right? Paying close attention to your reactions to events.
mm,
Um, you know, catching yourself in the middle of responding emotionally or disproportionately, and then eventually before you have those silly reactions, right? So you're not chewing your wife out for something silly that's actually your fault, or you're
mhm,
mad about something that's totally unrelated,
mhm,
and recognizing those sorts of things. So that's number one, is having that self-awareness and that discipline to
yep,
start controlling how you react to things. And I look at this as, people are like, well, I want to go climb Everest. I need a big challenge. It's like, yeah, you want to get there eventually. You need to have, big challenges like that too. But you're not going to be successful with those things if you're not even willing and able to work on all these little things. And all these
mhm,
little things day to day, that's our practice, right?
mhm,
That's, yes, they're minor and they seem silly in the moment, but that's how you accumulate this massive volume of training with these various techniques. And how do I rein myself in? How do I get control of these emotional reactions? What are my various tools for calming myself down, regaining composure, and being able to actually think clearly and act decisively versus turning into this, total mess
mhm,
who is just, flighty and indecisive and panicky and all these things that prevent us from actually doing what we need to do in order to save ourselves or save others, or and I say that in a very general sense, simple stuff
yep,
day to day, not just in some big emergency. So that's number one, is the self-awareness, and then finding little tasks day to day that you can do that, well, you know what, I'll save that for the next section. That makes more
sure,
sense in with regard to commitment. So yeah, work on the self-awareness
yeah.
part.
Yeah, for sure. And also, that whole internal versus external locus of control. Like, you have
Hmm.
way more control than some people think. right? And so
Right.
instead of always thinking, oh, it's them, it's them, it's them, like take ownership, right? Jocko Willing talks about this all the time, the extreme ownership. You know,
Yep.
everything is your fault. Like, even though on some sort of level it might not be, like, you have control over certain things. And so,
Yeah. Well, everything in your life is your responsibility, certainly, not your fault necessarily.
right,
It might be your
right,
fault. You might have screwed up, but
right.
even if if someone does something to you, it's still the onus is still on you to solve the problem because
Hmm.
they're not going to do it for you. So
Right,
yeah, that internal locus of control is huge, and again, that completely changes your perspective on life.
right.
It really truly, and this sounds really exaggerated, but it really truly does take you from being this miserable, sorry victim into this proactive, um, really engaged and properly optimistic type of person, which completely changes the experience of life.
Yep. Yeah, you don't need rose-colored glasses of like, oh, everything is going to be amazing,
Yeah,
but it gives the sense of control. I think is what is the benefit. It's like,
yeah,
hey, I actually can make changes depending on what the situation is. Um,
right.
yeah. So let's talk about commitment. Fourth C, commitment. What is that about?
So commitment really wraps all this stuff up, right? Because ultimately, um, if we are not willing to put these other things to work when it's significant and meaningful, then they're just kind of private fantasies, right? So
Mm,
yes, I'm very capable. I have all these skills. Okay, well, here's this situation where you need to demonstrate that stuff, but no, you're busy, cowering in the back, waiting for someone else to handle it for you.
mm,
Or you have determined to go, this is who I want to be. These are my values, and you kind of live that way day to day. But then as soon as there's a significant challenge, you back off of that stuff, right? You no longer you're not willing to stand by those things that you say you believe in
mm-hmm,
when they're actually being challenged. So it's not a big deal to be who you are when there's no threat to it. It
mm-hmm,
is a big deal to be who you are when there's some sort of risk for standing up to that, and that could be anything from just a social situation where you're the odd man out, politically, socially, whatever,
mm-hmm,
and still standing by what you believe.
mm-hmm.
um, and it could be obviously more dramatic things. So the commitment side of it includes the discipline and habit and routine and all that sort of creating that lifestyle and that structure that allows you to do these things you've decided need to be done. But then also the willingness to do the hard work, to do the things that are difficult when they are difficult, not just to do them when the circumstances have made them easy enough for you that it's okay.
Yeah. So what would be something that someone could do, and not even wait for it? What's something that someone could do like today or next week, sooner rather than later, to work on this?
So this is like the capacity. This is little daily stuff, little daily challenges, um, and really it comes down to consistently doing little things that you don't want to do, right? So just in a given day, think about how many little things we avoid because they're inconvenient or we just don't feel like it. Whatever the case is, we don't want to take the trash out. It's kind of cold outside, so we leave it in there for 3 days and it's overflowing.
Hmm.
Whatever.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, is recognizing the avoidance of that stuff and then taking action on it, right? And again, like I said earlier, it sounds silly to most people, like, well, that's no big deal. I can do that anytime I want. Really? Then why don't you?
Hmm.
There's a reason you're avoiding it. So if you think you're so hardcore, then do it. Don't
Hmm.
complain about it. Don't
Hmm.
procrastinate. Just get it done. And again, we build up that ability. We willpower is a thing that we can actually train and get better. There's ultimately a limit to how much of it we can use in a given period of time, but we can train it like pretty much anything else. Um, and then it's finding ways to structure your day to day life, um, in ways that support what you're trying to accomplish. And so that can be anything from making sure you get in bed at a decent hour so you can read for an hour or two every single day
Hmm.
instead of like, oh, it's been 6 months since I read a book because I'm too busy, checking what I missed on Instagram in the last 5 minutes, or whatever
Mm,
the case is,
mhm.
or I'm staying up all night, doing something that doesn't actually provide any value to me, um, or uh, putting your phone on do not disturb, or putting it in another room so you can actually get your work done in an efficient manner instead of screwing around and taking 8 hours to do something that should take 4.
Yeah.
So it's all those little things, and that creates um, that sense of control over ourselves and our circumstances. It builds up, our willpower to its kind of maximal ability, and then it allows us to apply that to bigger and bigger things, like I'm going to square away my nutrition. I'm going to, quit stuffing donuts down my pie hole every night,
Mhm.
or I'm going to get into the gym every single day, whatever the case is. And
Mhm.
so, we exercise this stuff at infinite levels of difficulty and duration. And so we have to be careful not to overlook and underestimate the importance of that little day-to-day stuff, because that creates the foundation.
The word I'm thinking of is discipline. The problem with that is it doesn't start with C. So,
Right.
commitment. Yeah.
Discipline.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, and that is certainly a big part of it. Although we get carried away with the idea of discipline often because it sounds cool, it sounds super tough.
Mhm.
The reality is that a very significant chunk of what we do in a given day is habit and routine. We're not
Mhm.
making conscious decisions. We're not really instituting discipline.
Mhm.
Um, for example, we might say, well, I quit eating donuts every night. I'm very disciplined. Well, no, you quit eating them because you stopped bringing them into the house.
Mm.
Even those nights you want a donut, you're not actually doing anything to prevent yourself from eating that donut.
Mhm.
You just don't have access to it anymore.
Got it. Yep.
So that's not discipline, that's structure,
Yep.
right? It might take discipline in the first place to stop buying them,
Mhm.
but it is not taking discipline to not eat them, right?
Yeah.
So we
Got it.
have to have that stuff. And it's not that we want to sterilize our environment to get rid of all temptation, because then our willpower weakens.
Mhm.
But we do have to recognize that we can't just be like the uber disciplined guy who's just like angry and self-deprived,
Right.
and it's just like denying himself all pleasure for eternity because that's cool and I
Yeah,
want to
yeah.
be disciplined.
Yeah, you don't need to be the
Uh,
austere, just, grump. So,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, like settle down, let's enjoy life. And let's focus on what's actually important and meaningful versus like just proving to everybody how badass you are,
Yeah, got it,
which
got
is
it.
not tough.
Yep. So a lot of our listeners have kids. I've got 2 little kids, and so how would you take these principles and basically teach or encourage, or I don't know what the word would be, but you know instill some of these things with kids?
I have a daughter too, actually. She just started college, believe it or not. Um, so the number one thing is that you have to be the example. And this is true for parents, it's true for coaches, for teachers, whatever. You can say whatever you want. What's the
Hmm.
classic parental advice? Do as I say, not as I do.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Yep.
Kids are always going to do what they see you doing. That is their model. That is how all kids learn ultimately, is modeling people who have done it before them. So whatever you're teaching your kids, you have to reinforce with your own behavior. And if
Mm,
you don't, you can't expect it to work. So that's number one, first and foremost. And then the second thing is that you need to, as much as possible, find ways to either create experiences for them to learn these things, or take advantage of the naturally occurring experiences to reinforce the lessons. So you can't take an 8-year-old kid and try to teach them these complex philosophical ideas. It doesn't work. They'll
hmm.
say, "Yes, I understand, Dad," but they don't understand, and it's not their own fault. They're 8,
Right.
right? I didn't understand this stuff when I was 8 years old. I'd like to think I did, and most teenagers, of course, think they understand it, but you
Right.
don't. Um, so what it really requires is having some kind of experience that they're engaged in, that you can associate those lessons with, right? So making them do hard work, or clean up the backyard, or take the trash out, whatever it is, going on some tough hike. It doesn't really matter what it is exactly, but saying, hey, this is an opportunity um, to kind of impart this particular lesson on. Well, why do we do this? Why is this important? Or Why is it important for you to have the integrity to go take responsibility for a mistake you make? Whatever the case is. And so rather than having these like isolated philosophical conceptual things, simplifying them as much as possible, really reducing them to their essence, and then attaching them to an experience,
Mm,
because that's what's going to be memorable to them. And
mhm.
then, of course, always reinforcing it with your own behavior.
Yeah. That's why I really like sports, because I feel like there's so many life lessons in sports, from how to lose graciously to putting in hard work to, anything in between. So that's an obvious one, but
Yeah.
yeah, I like that. W-
Well, but even sports, right? As a parent or a coach, you have to reinforce those things. Like they're not
Yeah,
necessarily
of course.
natural
Yeah,
lessons, and so that people forget that, right?
totally.
And so that's your opportunity. So a kid, your kid comes home after getting totally slaughtered in the baseball game,
Hmm.
and refuse to shake the opposing teammate's hand or whatever the case is.
Yep.
That's when you pull them aside and say, "Hey, little Johnny, like this isn't going to fly.
Yep.
This is why you need to, learn how to be gracious even in defeat and
Yep.
in especially in victory.
Yep.
This is why, and this is going to build all these other characteristics. And then, of
Yep.
course, they're a lot more likely to understand it if they've had that experience.
Yeah. We my 5-year-old has this chess board called Storytime Chess. So it teaches chess
Hmm.
through stories about the King Shaky, and he's got these characteristics, and then the rooks have these characteristics. So it's a pretty cool way to teach chess. But I don't let up on him. Like, I beat him every time, and he gets
Yeah.
pissed off, right? So it's like I'm having these exact conversations with him right now of like, hey
Right.
man, like, you got to shake hands. You might not like it, but you got to shake hands, and you got to just take it, and let's learn from it. Let's go over the game if you want, but this is not going to fly when you're in school and you're playing with your friend and you get pissed off and you flip the board. Like,
Right. Yeah. Well,
um
and he's going to learn too that way that when he actually does beat you, it's going to be an actual accomplishment.
exactly. Yep. Yep. And he's getting close, which is kind of scary. Um let's all right, so I want to just kind of wrap things up soon, but is there anything else from the book, or let's go with this? Is there a main takeaway that if someone reads this book and you want them to come away with just one concept, what would that be?
That sense of responsibility for the course and content and experience of your own life. That, I mean, it literally, if there was only one thing, and I hope there's more than one thing everybody gets out of the book, but if it's only one thing, it's got to be that, because with that you can essentially get to the other things.
Mm-hmm.
Without that, none of those things are going to
Yep.
ever take shape.
Yep. Yeah, that makes sense. Take responsibility for yourself.
Yep.
So let's talk about the tactical games. I didn't really know what it was until I heard about it from you on some other podcasts, and so I figured some people might be interested in learning what it is.
Yeah, it's a weird one for me, man. I got to be honest. So, I was basically forced into retirement from weightlifting. I blew out my shoulder at the
Hmm.
2015 national championships, and for any number of reasons, over the next 2 years, I just couldn't get back into shape. Part of it was by that time I was 37 years old, which wasn't helping anything. But um, so I was kind of this lost, very vulnerable young man looking for something, some kind of athletic outlet. And my best friend is a career Navy guy. He was a corpsman and multiple combat tours and stuff. And he found this tactical games thing, which was at that point in its infancy still.
Mm.
And he signed up for a competition, and he kind of was like, just come on, just do it. I was like, well, I'm not a shooter. Like, I mean, yes, I've shot guns. I'm not opposed to them necessarily, but I'm not like super into shooting.
You're
Like, I
not a
wasn't.
gun guy.
I'm not a fervent gun
Yeah,
guy,
yeah.
right? And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? Why not? Like, I'm not doing anything else. This is something completely outside my wheelhouse. Literally going in to compete against people who've been shooting since they were little children.
Hmm.
Um, so it would be a hell of a challenge. And so I went, and this was February 2019, I think was the first one I did. And it was tough, man. But it was one of those things where it was so different from what I had done, that I think that's what was appealing to it. And it was this it wasn't strictly shooting competition. I've done a couple of those, and they're just not super exciting to me
Hmm.
because again, the gun part of it is not the part that's super appealing.
Hmm.
It's the total experience. It's the total combination. It's very physically demanding, especially for a former weightlifter. I hadn't, I was really in shape when I was younger, and I was great. A 6 minute mile to me was like a normal thing.
Mm.
I'm not joking when I say that I took a few months to prepare for that first one. I physically could not run for longer than 1 minute because my lower legs were so deconditioned that I was incapable of picking my toes up off the ground. Like it was bananas. So
Yeah, I mean, triples are
it was
normally
a
cardio for you, right, as a weightlifter. So
right, yeah, and I didn't do triples anyway,
yeah.
doubles at the most. Uh, so it was one of those things where it was like, man, that was really hard. It was something totally different, and then I was just hooked. And I think I've done 11 or 12 of them now at this point. So
Got it. So it's
the
a
the
combination of like
problem,
carrying things and rucking up stuff and
it's yeah, anything you can think of. So it's over 2 days. It's 6 to 8 different events.
gotcha.
So you're doing 3 to 4 different stages per day, and they're anywhere. Yeah, typically now they're time capped to 12 minutes. Although
Mm.
you have ones that go outside that. Like for example, I qualified for the first national championships. That was this last November, and one of the events was a 12-mile, 50-pound ruck.
Mm.
So that was just one of 6 or 7 events, or no, it was more because it was 3 days instead of two. So that was one of 9 or 10 events, whatever it was. So yeah, you have to be prepared to do just about anything and be willing to do just about anything. And there's very few things that I would, or there's a million things I'd rather do than ruck for 12 miles. But it was one of those things where it was like, well, this is what it is. I'm going to do it. I'm going to train for it if I can. And I
Do you know
survived, and I wasn't even last.
do you know going in what the events are, or do they tell you then
That's
and there?
the only event we've ever known ahead of time because it was kind of one of those safety
Gotcha.
things where it's like, well, we don't want people to actually die, so
Right.
we're going to give them a heads up on this a couple months out.
Gotcha.
But no, you don't know what the events are until you're right there. So
Gotcha.
even if in a 2 day event, you don't know what Saturday's events are until Saturday morning when you get there.
Mm.
You don't know what Sunday's events are until Sunday morning.
Hmm.
Or like for example, there was one I did where I finished the last stage on Saturday, and one of the organizers came by and said, "Hey, if you're in the elite division, you need to be here at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. Wear good shoes." I'm like, okay. So that was a ruck, first thing in the morning, starting in the dark. So they'll throw stuff at you like that.
Yep.
But that's what makes it interesting,
Yep.
right? And it's because if there's always going to be something that you're not good at or not the best at. Um, so physically, I've done pretty well. My shooting is definitely not up to par with most of the elite competitors that I'm going against, but
Hmm.
I'm not passionate enough about shooting to really put in the necessary time on that. So I
Hmm.
kind of just do what I do, and you know see where it goes. And I've done okay that way. But
Hmm.
if I really wanted to win or podium at those things, I would have to get very serious about shooting. And so far that hasn't happened.
Yeah. Do you see yourself coaching for as long as you can uh, in terms of weightlifting?
Yeah, I think the real question is how long people will be interested in having me coach
Mm.
versus how long I'll be interested in coaching, right? And I look at what I do now as um, I know it's temporary. I know it could go away at any time. So I'm trying to get as much out of it as I can while I can. I don't think that in 20 years I'm probably going to be in the same position I am now. Um, I don't know. Obviously,
Right.
most things with regard to Catalyst Athletics have been unpredicted and unpredictable.
Hmm.
So it could be. But yeah, I don't foresee myself quitting when there is still an opportunity for me to continue.
Yep. Got it. You didn't predict the Black Box Summit in Austin.
We actually kind of did when we
Well,
heard
yeah.
there were
That-
two specific people attending.
That's a whole other podcast. Two last
That's a whole
questions,
book. Yeah.
and then we'll let you go. So I don't know if this is actually going to be an easy question or a hard question as an English major, but what book would you recommend most people read, if not all people,
You mean
besides
aside
your
from
own?
all my
Yeah,
books? Yeah.
besides your own.
Uh, actually, you know what? The book that I read last year that really resonated with me, and that was really one of those. I get disappointed with books so regularly. It's kind of like, why is this a bestseller? Like, what am I missing here? Am I the stupid one? But the book Deep Survival by Lawrence Gonzalez
Mm.
uh, is just a phenomenal book. And I actually refer to it in my book a couple times, but
Oh yeah. Okay.
it's it's uh, probably not what people are expecting. But that book, and then he did a follow up called Everyday Survival. Both of those are really good and definitely worth reading.
Cool. I like it. And then the last question is, what's on your bucket list? So before you kick the bucket, what are some things that you want to get done, travel to, whatever?
You know what's funny is I've never been a person who's really thought about that stuff, and I probably should, because there is a bucket in my future at some point. Um, you know what? What I'm starting to do this year is really try to set aside more time for myself. Right? I've been going so hard for the past 15 years, worrying about everybody else in the universe besides myself.
Hmm.
Like I'm going to do a course in Idaho in July for a week, and I've super excited about it because I've had to be the guy in charge and the guy teaching all the time
Hmm.
for so many years. Like I haven't had the opportunities to go be a student again in so long.
Hmm.
So I guess I would say just in broad strokes, that's my goal is to get to ensure that I'm building more of that stuff into my life
Hmm.
versus constantly putting it off because I don't have the time.
Yeah, I like that. Cool, man. Anything else about the book? And then, if not, where can people find out more about the book, yourself, Catalyst Athletics?
For the book specifically, becomingtough.com or Instagram handle is becoming tough. That'll give you, links to purchasing stuff and excerpts and, endorsement and some reviews and all that fun stuff if you need more convincing. And then, of course, catalystathletics.com or the Instagram handle Catalyst Athletics. Between those two, you'll find every single thing I'm doing or have done.
Yep. Cool. Well, I appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy, so thanks for coming on, and I'll see you on Instagram, being the star that you are.
Yeah, yes. One of these days, I'll get a blue check, and then it's going to be all over. Then people will have to take me seriously.
Exactly. To show your butt
All
more.
right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Please listen carefully.